I am Conor MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod. I was born in 1518 in the village of Glenfinnan on the shores of Loch Shiel. And I am immortal.
I regard Highlander as being certainly one of the important films that I've ever had the luck to do. I thought, it's a question of luck sometimes about what you do and don't do. And that I've made many films, as it turns out, and on the whole, I think I've been very lucky. But certainly, I would, put Highlander high up among the sort of milestones in my career.
Highlander was a pretty interesting film at that stage in my career to work on. I think it was only the fourth or fifth film I designed, so it was an interesting experience, interesting visual experience. I think I just finished it in 1980.
I guess it must have been 1985. I was aware that they had been interviewing directors of photography to do this film with Russell Mulcahy. So I heard about that, and sure enough, I got a call, as did many others, and I went to an interview with Russell Mulcahy. But before I did that, I thought, well, I better have a look and see what he's done, because he had made one film called Razorback, which I saw, and I thought, oh, this is really wild. This is kind of like pop video and everything else. But I recognised that it did something, the subject of the film did something which was kind of rare, really, is that it moved into the surrealistic area, which film is actually perfectly designed to do. But I could also see that he had a very sharp sense of editing and a lot of sense of fun too. So the thing progressed. They asked me to do it. His clear idea of the picture was more to do with doing what he did on Razorback as a sort of a starting off point, rather than doing what perhaps I'd done before. But of course, he did succeed in conveying to me what he wanted to do, and I was in agreement with him. So I was able to shift myself into a new area. Because we were working with this strange fantasy element, obviously Russell was not going to be inhibited by filmmaking technique as it was then, the point it had then reached. He wanted to go into an area which was perfectly permissible because of the fantasy element of the script. And they could quite rightly wanted very, very exotic camera work, camera movement, light distribution, where light sources that could appear, lightning, everything going crazy. It's just becoming completely unreal. That was the concept of the picture anyway. I mean, you can't have much reality with that sort of subject. So that was in fact what we were permitted to do, and rightly did, I think. Alan Cameron, who was a brilliant art director, he constructed sets, of course. Some of the things were done in actual real locations, some of the things were done in sets. And of course the element of the set becomes another one of those things which I say make up the whole film. I mean, what gives the film its character.
Well, it's quite an interesting experience, really, because I'd heard that the film was going to be made, and my family comes from the west coast of Scotland, so I was quite intrigued in the title of the film, Highlander. And it was just one of those strange coincidences, because as I say, I was pretty interested in the title, and then suddenly I got a phone call to go and see Russell, the director, at Blake's Hotel, I seem to remember. I'd never met him before. I'd seen some of his pop promos, obviously, because he had a really good reputation for doing these pop promos. I think it was Duran Duran Wild Boy, I think it was called at the time, which was fantastic, with sort of windmills and very dark and moody, and I liked the look of that. So when I got the phone call from him, I trundled off to Blake's Hotel and met Russell, who we got on pretty well, and he gave me the script, and I read the script and loved it, and about a week later he said, would you like to do the film? So that's how it started, basically.
the very beginning of the film. We had to shoot in this stadium where there was a wrestling going on, which was a live performance. We had available to us the Skycam system, which is a highly complex system in the sense that it relies on pulleys being fixed in the roof on the four corners of this vast stadium, and there's cable running through the pulleys, and the pulleys are being driven, pulled and pushed, and they're releasing one, pulling another, and that literally the camera, which is hanging on a pod, can be placed anywhere within that cube of space by a computer. And it was flying through. In fact, it's in the picture because in one of the shots on the ground, we had cameras all around. We had 9 cameras on that thing during this thing, and one of the angles low on the ring, you see the Skycam travelling through the shot. I do. The audience don't. It's actually there, and that was. That's a brilliant concept. Of course, Garrett Brown was the originator of, first of all, the Steadicam, and then he developed it to Skycam. He finished up with what looked like a helicopter shot inside a stadium, which would be asking a lot of, especially as it's a public performance and everybody's at risk. But even there, we had to do it. I had to improvise a trick quickly, because with the lens configuration available on that pod, we wanted to have a wide angle to get the maximum effect after entering the tunnel of light to this noise and this shouted cheering and this exotic wrestling. We wanted to go for a very wide view, but we wanted to travel, and we finished in on the upper gallery where we introduce Christopher Lambert, in other words, playing his role. Well, Russell Mulcahy wanted the wide shot, but he also wanted to finish close on Christopher Lambert, so he was torn between one and the other, because if he put on a lens which finished up close enough to Christopher Lambert, it meant that we didn't get the wide shot. So the only way to fix it was, again, a technical thing to do, just a matter of thinking about it basically, was to use the wide angle, which would the necessity mean the approach to him. It was quite fast, and it's a big heavy unit, and it would literally, to finish the size we wanted, would finish up like 1 foot away from him. Well, that wouldn't have been a very suitable beginning to a picture by having that suddenly go overshoot its mark. You can imagine it's like trying to stop a racing car. And so at any rate, we figured that we could manage to do it by having, everybody was taking flash pictures. It wasn't our doing, they were already doing it. We didn't give people flash cameras. So by having a flash go off, we put one white frame in, and we then we do the same shot with the closer lens. And there is a point when it resembles the size of the approaching wide-angle shot, and you then finish up with the same parameters. With the white frame, you've gone from one to the other, and it's just, you do it on one of the flashes, because there was flash. So one of the flash, one white frame, change the lens, boom, and you finish up close on the cylinder. And nobody realised that that's happened. Now that belongs, originally, that whole concept of that belongs to Citizen Kane, because Wells knows in his innovative shooting of that picture, in the same way as Russell Mulcahy comes along, first of all not knowing what not knowing what the actual classic way to make a film is, as believed at that moment of time, but wanted to just do things. And he did a shot over a roof into a skylight and through the skylight. Well, he never did any such thing, of course, but it was one moment when they were approached to the point where the skylight was going to hit the camera. Then they took the skylight and the roof off and continued the shot, and there was just a little fast dissolve. So it was the same concept. That's what you have to do in filming. You have to draw upon your resources, and your resources are infinite.
The film is quite structurally complex. You know, the various layers going back to the 17th century to the Second World War. So that was, it wasn't so much a challenge, it just made the job much more interesting, because normally on a movie you only do one period, or if you're lucky 2 periods, and combining all these different periods made the film much more challenging. The challenge really was kind of seamlessly integrating the present day New York into the Scottish Highlands. And Russell had some great ideas for those transitions, and I think 2 or 3 of them came off really well in the movie. But it was quite an interesting proposition, and I love that in the movie, that, you know, you went back into, I think it was 16th century Scotland or in present day New York. So that was fascinating from my point of view. The Highlander goes down into the car parking structure, which is supposed to be obviously close to or under Madison Square Gardens, and we actually shot it in Earl's Court in London, which was quite a challenge to close it all down. We had to black out the whole car park's open to the sky, so we had to black out all around it, which is an enormous area, blackouts.
In the car park, he had this battle with presumably another figure who was immortal, and we had a lot of visual effects.
We got a lot of American cars, and halfway through the sequence the cars start to explode, the hoods come up, the lights explode, the windshields explode, so it was a huge special effects project as well. And it's an interesting sequence because at the end of this whole battle, once I think it's MacLeod's enemy is beheaded, the camera starts to rise up.
And that particular garage had big concrete crossbeams, which there was enough room for us to raise the camera up to the limit, at which point we were within the actual ceiling part of the garage. And we eventually finished up just before we hit the roof with the frame of a wall of a certain tonality and a colour, darker. The darkness was a matter of controlling the light so it wasn't too brightly lit.
We actually just put a false beam in for it to go past, so there was a sort of almost like a wipe, and then we built a foreground wall in Scotland. And then it comes up into the Highlands of Scotland, and we see them all riding out of the castle.
We shot the car park first, and I had to remember the tone and colour, and because they're so similar, you don't notice that the two are joined.
At the time, it was quite an interesting transition, and it's been copied quite a few times since. There was actually a commercial on a couple of years after that blatantly copied the sequence. The cast itself in the loch and the bridge and is actually there. We just covered up modern things, took down TV aerials, took down telephone wires and telephone poles and things like that. So that particular castle was actually existing. So, as I say, when I actually first got this script, it was pretty exciting because I thought I could go back and see all the places I visited as a child. And I scouted. One of the great things about being a designer, you get to scout a huge amount of countries and countrysides and things like that. So we scouted a lot of the Highlands looking for the locations. But we actually ended up within about 30 miles, most of the locations of where my family was, because it's just a very beautiful part of Scotland.
One of the things that attracted me to Highlander as an idea for me to shoot, one of the things irresistible, was the fact that I would be able to go to Scotland and film there, because it's such a magical country, just wonderful visually. And I'd always wanted to go there. I'd always wanted to work there and never had the opportunity. Although it's a difficult territory because you do have very, very varied weather conditions, and that proved to be the case.
At the very beginning of the movie, there's a battle between the two clans. Obviously the MacLeods and someone else in the Kurgan appears.
And the weather that day, we went from snow to sunlight the rain. It was just an incredible day, and it was June.
I'd found this location, again, in a beautiful glen in Scotland, and we got all the locals from Fort William and all the towns around to come and fight. And it was pretty cold, and they're all in kilts and not wearing too much, and they've got these heavy swords, so they obviously had a little bit to drink before they turned up.
And they were throwing themselves in the water. They relived the battle, the actual real battle. They were absolutely physically hitting each other.
And there was one guy who must have been about 6'4", who looked magnificent in his kilt and his broadsword, a real Scotsman, red hair, big and stocky, even though he was quite tall. And at the end of filming, he wandered off singing away with all his costume on and his sword, and he was last seen walking into the mist, and no one dared stop him and ask him for the gear back.
One of the things about this whole film, which as part of that decision to make such a fantasy element and such a vibrant film, meant that our camera work was much more liberal than it would have been on an ordinary subject. And that involved using the Lumar crane, a mechanical device for putting the camera into positions where you're inhibited by the difficulty of placement. But the Lumar, which is French design by a man called Lavalou, permits many things. It's a long arm with the camera is suspended at the end, and of course you have to have a remote operating facility for the camera itself. And the operator sees, as a TV image, sees what he's got in the frame. And the Lumar crane was used frequently. It gives you an endless extension of possibilities. One particular shot, where we are above the kurgan on his horse, we have the Lumar crane arm, and the sun come down at the beginning of the shot, and you see the crane arm move down, and you know it didn't matter because it was just like another mad element. It was just a black shadow, sort of sharp shape shadow going across. It was as though it belonged to his apparition, you know, on a horse. Well, normally on a film, you would have to have another take on that, at least, because you'd have to recover that. You'd say, oh, there was something wrong with that shot. But because the concept of that thing, it worked.
Scripts usually have very brief descriptions of what the set should be like, thank goodness, because then the art director or designer can use his imagination. So in a case like MacLeod's loft, exactly that. It said MacLeod has a New York loft. So it could be millions of different combinations. So as a designer, I like to actually read, obviously, all the scenes that take place in the loft, see what the main action is, and then start designing the sort of space around the action. And gradually then you talk to the DP about how he might light it, whether he likes backlight or side light, or how he sees it should be lit. And then I like to incorporate the windows into sketches. I do rough sketches, then I do sort of fairly large scale models so we can sit around and work out how it's going to be. And then obviously on every film you have to work to a budget, so I don't know what the budget was for the loft, but it's very specific. So it might be, say, $50,000 to build the loft and $10,000 for the dressings. So you have to build it. You can't obviously build $1 million loft. You have to work within the budget as well. So you can gradually refine it down, and then obviously the choice of colours and the choice of furnishings try to reflect the character in the script. So it's a gradual process, and it's rather like, I always like to think of it as painting a picture. You know, when you want to paint a picture, you have some idea what you want to achieve at the end, but you modify it gradually, and as forms and colours evolve, and gradually the thing becomes more concrete. We built MacLeod's apartment. Obviously, I'd got lots of books on New York lofts, and I believe we'd already scouted New York, so I'd taken some pictures of lofts in New York, and we built it based on an amalgam of different pictures that we liked. And Russell and myself had sat down and said, well, that would be good for MacLeod, it should look like this. And then obviously I like to talk to Christoph then and say, you know, what would you like there? You know, your character, is there anything specific you might have in there as a character?